Montana Territory, April of 1885, and the thaw had come to the Muscle-Shell country the way it always came, all at once and without apology. The road into Coldwater Bend had turned to brown soup that pulled at a horse's fetlocks, and the whole valley smelled of wet sage and old snow going to water. Meadowlarks had come back to the fence wire. The high benches still wore white, but down in the bottoms the cottonwoods had gone red at the tips, which was as near as that country ever came to a promise. Tate Renslow sat his bay gelding at the edge of the depot yard and did not get down. He had been 40 minutes early, which his ranch hand had noticed and been wise enough not to mention. He was a tall man of 39, spare from 20 seasons of horsework, and he wore his hat brim pulled low on the left out of a habit so old he no longer knew he had it. Under that brim, the left side of his face was the smooth, shining country that fire leaves behind when it has taken what it wants and moved on. The right side was ordinary. That, in his private opinion, was the cruelty of it. It gave a person something to compare against. He kept his left hand low on his thigh, out of the light. "Stage is coming," said Emmett Doyle from the wagon seat. Emmett was 23 and handsome the way a young horse is handsome, and he had been miserable since the January afternoon he sat on a stool in a photographer's shop in Big Timber, wearing another man's good black coat, while the powder flared. The truth of that morning had been 2 years in the making, and it had been made in ink. It began with 9 lines in a St. Louis matrimonial paper, paid for in a moment of weakness in the dead middle of the winter of 1883. Rancher, Montana Territory. 400 acres on good water, no children, not young, seeks correspondence. 4 women wrote. 3 stopped after he answered honestly about the winters. The 4th wrote back to ask what the winters sounded like. He had answered her at the kitchen table with the lamp burning down, and she had answered him, and somewhere in there the thing stopped being a transaction and became the central fact of his life. 51 letters, kept in an oilcloth roll in the tack room, tied with a latigo string. He did not know how many he had sent. A man does not count what he gives away. She signed them Adelaide. The stage came down the last grade throwing mud, and the door swung, and a woman stepped down into the muck of Coldwater Bend in a gray traveling dress that had been brushed too many times. She was 26 years old, and no beauty, and had never claimed to be, tall, with a long plain face and a mouth accustomed to holding still. Her knuckles were red, the hands of somebody who had washed other people's linen for a living. She had 1 carpet bag, 1 small trunk, and sewn into the hem of her petticoat. The price of a ticket back to St. Louis. She had bought it with her own money and told no one, and it was the only thing that had made boarding the train possible at all. "I will go and look at the place," she had told herself on the platform in St. Louis. "That is all I have agreed to. I can always come home." She looked up, and her eyes went straight to Emmett Doyle, because Emmett Doyle's face was the face in the tintype she had carried against her ribs for 4 months. Emmett turned the color of a scalded plum. Ma'am, I ain't him." And she turned. She looked at the tall one at the edge of the yard and saw the ruin of his face and did not flinch, though the narrator will not pretend she felt nothing. But it was not the face she was looking at. He had come forward to take her trunk, and his left hand closed on the handle, and the ring finger of that hand did not close with the others. It stood a little apart and a little crooked, set wrong by somebody in a hurry a long time ago, and there was ink worn permanently into the knuckle above it. She had spent 2 years learning that hand. She had traced it in every letter. the wobble in the capital R he had once apologized for, the place the pen dug too deep on a downstroke because the finger could not lie flat, the thumbprint of ink in the margin of the ones written late, when he was tired and stopped being careful. She knew that hand the way other people know a voice. Oh, she thought. There you are. She said nothing. She let him take the trunk. She looked at the mud and the meadowlarks and said, "It's further from town than I pictured. 11 miles. His voice came out like something dragged over gravel. "I can put you at the hotel. Stage goes back east Thursday. I'd like to see the place first. If that's all right." And she climbed into the wagon on her own, without being handed, and folded those red knuckles on top of her carpet bag, and waited. Tate Renslow stood a moment in the mud with a woman's trunk in his arms and the whole town watching him from behind window glass. Then he loaded it, and mounted, and they went out along the river road with the water running high and brown beside them, and not one of the three of them said a word for 11 miles. Act 2. The arrival of the Renslow place sat in the elbow of the Musselshell, where the river bent hard south around a gravel bar, the low log house with its shake roof gone silver, the pole corrals, the long horse barn, and above it the windmill turning slow and complaining in the evening wind. A single enormous cottonwood stood at the bend, half its crown torn away by some old storm. The wound healed over gray. 31 horses came to the fence when they heard the wagon. Mirren, for that was her name, though nobody in Montana Territory knew it yet, sat forward without meaning to. The place smelled of sage and river silt and horse and wood smoke, and under it the sharp, clean smell of new-cut pine from a stack of rails by the barn. The light was going the color of weak tea. She had built this place in her head 100 nights, out of words, in a boarding-house bed with 3 other women breathing around her, and she had built it wrong in places. The house was smaller. The barn was bigger. The cottonwood at the bend was exactly as he had written it. "It's not much," Tate said. "It's enough." He showed her the house. 1 room and a lean-to, a plank table, a stove, a rope bed with a good tick, a shelf of books that did not surprise her at all. There were curtains at the one window, hemmed unevenly. She looked at them a moment too long, and he saw her looking. "My mother's," he said. 19 years since she passed. I never took them down." He set her trunk against the wall and did not look at her for the next part. "House is yours as long as you want it. I sleep in the tack room. There's a bar on that door, and I'd take it kindly if you used it, not because you need it, but because you'll sleep better knowing it's there." He set his hat on his knee. "You're not obliged to me for anything. Not the ticket, not the supper, not a minute of your time. Thursday there's a stage. If you want it, I'll drive you in myself, and I won't ask you a question the whole 11 miles. You're plain spoken. I'm out of practice at being anything else." He made her supper, and they ate with the lamp between them. He called her Adelaide 4 times. Each time it went through her like a splinter, working deeper. She did not correct him. Afterward, while he saw to the horses, she stood in the doorway with her arms crossed against the cold, coming off the river, listening to the windmill creak, thinking about the shape of the word liar and how well it fit her. Then she went to the barn. She had not meant to. Her feet took her. The lantern threw a warm circle down the alleyway, and the horses put their heads over the stall doors as she came, and she stopped at the first one, a rangy blue roan with a white ring around one eye. "Hello, Sergeant." The roan blew at her. She went down the line. "Josephine, little bit." Cracker, her voice was quiet and steady. "You're Pilgrim." He said you were the ugliest horse in Montana and the best one, and not to tell the others. At the end of the alleyway, in the dark, Tate Renslow stood holding a hay fork he had forgotten he was holding. He had written those names, 2 winters of them, 100 small particulars that could not possibly matter to a woman in a St. Louis boarding house. Which mare bit, which gelding feared the wheelbarrow, which colt was born in a blizzard and lived. He had written them because it was the only time in his life anything he said had seemed worth the paper. She had kept every one. She reached the last stall, where a black 4-year-old stood back against the wall with his ears flat and the whites of his eyes showing. And you are the one nobody can get a hand on. "That's Cinder," Tate said from the dark. "I'd not go in there. I don't intend to." She did not turn around. "You wrote that you'd be a month gentling him. That was last October. A horse shifted. The windmill turned. It's been longer than a month," Tate said. "I know," said Marin. "I read every word. Act 3. The quiet bond April went out wet, and May came in green, and a rhythm settled over the place the way silt settles in slow water. She did not take the Thursday stage. She did not take the one after it. Neither of them spoke of it. The stage came and went 11 miles off, and out at the bend the days simply continued, and each Thursday laid another stone in something neither was willing to name. She worked. She scrubbed 19 years of grease off the stove, beat the tick, put up a line, and washed everything the house owned, with the terrible efficiency of a woman who had done 10 times that much daily for wages. She found the kitchen garden gone to quackgrass and reclaimed 9 rows of it. He tried to thank her once. She looked at him as though he had spoken Greek. "I'm not a guest," she said. "Guests are a burden. I'd rather be almost anything than a burden." He learned next that she could figure. He came in one evening to find the account book open on the table, every column of the last 11 months recopied in a small, clean hand, and the errors, 4 of them, all his, marked in the margin in pencil. "You're carrying a note. To the postmaster. Orville Pike lends money out of the back of the post office. He's the only man in the county who will. $400 3 years back for the well and the barn roof. I've paid down half. He charges you 2 per centum a month. He charges everybody that. No, he does not. I have seen the Hartley's book. He charges them 1. She closed the ledger and set the pencil square beside it, and said nothing more that night. Tate lay awake in the tack room with the smell of leather and neatsfoot oil around him, thinking about a woman 5 weeks in the county who already knew what the neighbors paid. The third thing came out of the Black Horse. She never went into Cinder's corral. She sat on the top rail of it, an hour in the morning and an hour before supper, 11 days running, with her mending in her lap and her back half turned, doing nothing whatsoever, until the day the 4-year-old walked up behind her out of pure aggrieved curiosity and put his nose against her shoulder. She did not turn around. She kept sewing. "That's your own method," Tate said that evening. "It's yours. You wrote it to me in the winter of '84. You said the only thing that ever worked was to be dull enough long enough that they got curious, and that most men can't bear to be dull." She bit off her thread. "I have a great deal of practice at being dull." He had no answer to that at all. There were other things. The evening she handed him his coffee, and their fingers did not touch, though both knew within a quarter inch where the others were. The morning she came out to a west sky the color of a bruise and said, without being asked, "You'll want the horses in." And he moved 31 head off the bottom an hour before Hale laid the pasture flat. And every day without ever once being obvious about it. She watched his hands, the left one, the crooked one, doing everything a fraction slower and more deliberate than the right. She had known that hand 2 years before she saw it, and seeing it did not diminish the knowing. It was like meeting a river you had only ever read the name of. He, for his part, watched her stop herself. He could not have said what she was stopping. He only saw it 12 times a day. Something rising up behind that plain, still face and being put away again. Then came the big wind at the end of May. It came off the Snowies about 10 o'clock and took the loose shake off the north end of the barn and made the whole valley roar, and Tate had just got the tack room door shut against it when he heard her out there. She stood 3 feet from the door in her shawl, with her hair whipping. "Go inside," he said. Marin, and he did not say that, because he did not know it. He said, "Adelaide, go inside." She did not move. "You wrote to me once," she said, raising her voice against the wind, "that the wind out here sounds like a train that never arrives." Tate Renslow stood in his own doorway and could not speak. January of the first winter. You wrote it small at the bottom of the second page, where you put the things you did not want to have written. I have read that line 400 times, Mr. Renslow, in a room with 3 other women breathing in it, in a city where I could not hear the wind at all. Her chin was up, and her eyes were wet, and she let them be. Whoever's face is in that tintype, it is not the face that wrote to me. I knew it on the platform in about 4 seconds, and I have known it every day since. I would be obliged if you would stop calling me a name we both know is not the point. The wind took the last of it. Tate stood there while the train that never arrives went on and on through the cottonwoods, and understood, with the spreading cold of a man who has misjudged something enormous, that this woman had not been rescued from anything. She had walked in with her eyes open, carrying a ticket home she had not used, and she had stood on the far side of his lie for 6 weeks, waiting with perfect patience for him to be brave. She has known the whole time, he thought. She has been being kind to me the whole time. Before the world came up that river road, and it was coming, it had already saddled and started, there were a few more good weeks at the bend. If you have stayed with these two this far, stay a while longer. What comes next is the part that changes everything, and if you find yourself moved by tales of love that survived the worst the West could throw at it, the bell beneath this story is how we go on meeting like this. Act 4. The threat from outside Orville Pike had been postmaster at Coldwater Bend for 9 years, and in a country where the mail came twice a week and the nearest bank was in Billings, that made him rather more than a man who sold stamps. He was small and pink and clean-shaven, and he kept a kettle on the stove in the back room where he sorted, and he had read every letter that passed through his hands worth the reading. Steam did most of it. A little care with the wafer did the rest. He had read 51 letters out of St. Louis and everyone Tate Renslow sent back, and he had learned 2 things. First, that a burned man on 400 acres of the best water in the valley was lonely enough to be led. Second, and worth a great deal more, he had written to a cousin in Cairo, Illinois, and learned that Miss Adelaide Rusk had married a traveling man in the autumn of 1884 and gone with him to Kansas City, which meant that whoever stepped off that stage in April, she was not Adelaide Rusk. He waited until the first Saturday in June, when the mercantile was full. Tate had come in for nails and coal oil. Marin stood at the dry goods counter, and the Hartley women had said good morning to her, and old Reverend Feely had touched his hat. And for one moment that Saturday it looked as though the county might simply decide to let two people alone. "Miss Rusk," said Orville Pike from the post office doorway, a letter in his hand, his voice pitched to the back wall. "Or should I say, well, that is the difficulty, isn't it?" The store went quiet, the way a pasture goes quiet before weather. He read the letter out. He read it beautifully, in the voice of a man performing a public service at some cost to himself. Adelaide Rusk, married in Cairo, October the 9th, 1884. Living, so far as the cousin knew, in Kansas City, certainly not in Montana Territory. "I make no accusation," said Orville Pike, before the sheriff and these good people. "I only observe that a woman came into this county under a name belonging to somebody else, took up residence with a bachelor 11 miles from any witness, and has since had her hands in his account books. I have seen this precise article worked in Nebraska. A man in Kearney lost 160 acres to it. I would be failing my neighbors not to say so. There are things a small town does very fast, and turning is one of them." Marin did not move. She stood with 3 spools of thread in her hand, and felt every eye in the building arrive at her, and she found she was not frightened so much as very tired, the particular tiredness of a woman found out in a lie she told for the best reason she had. She opened her mouth to answer for herself. She did not get the chance. "Her name," said Tate Renslow, "is her own business." He came up the middle aisle and set the coal oil on the counter and took his hat off, which no one in that store had ever seen him do, so that the whole burned side of his face stood plain in the window light. He looked at them all. "I lied to her first," he said. "The likeness I sent was Emmett Doyle's. I sat him for it, and I paid for it, and I sent it, because I have got this face, and I could not bear to lose the only person in this world who ever asked me what the winter sounded like." He said it without shame and without heat, which was somehow worse for them to hear. "So if you want to talk about a fraud worked in this county, you talk about me. She came anyway. She stayed anyway." "Renslow," the sheriff began, "she's with me. That's the whole of it. And any man who wants to say different can say it to me out in the street, and then he can say it to the county, and then he can go on home to his supper." Orville Pike smiled. He had lost the store, and he knew it. And he was a man who had always understood that there is more than one way to bring down a horse. "Then I will say only this, and it is business, not morals. Your note is at 90 days, Mr. Renslow, and I am calling it. $211 principal, and the interest on the 1st of September. You'll want to sell horses. The market's poor. I'm sorry for it." They rode out that afternoon and did not speak until the river road bent under the cottonwoods. Then Marin said, "You have cost yourself the town. The town has been looking at this face for 21 years. It can look at something else a while." She did not thank him. She thought about it and found that thanks was too small an instrument. Instead, on Thursday, she rode the Blue Roan into Coldwater Bend and sold back a ticket to St. Louis that had been sewn into the hem of a petticoat since March. It fetched $22.40. She put it in the coffee tin above the stove where the ranch's money lived, and she did not tell him, and he did not find it until August. Act 5, the revelation she told him on a Sunday at the end of June, at the plank table, with the lamp between them and the river running loud outside with the last of the snowmelt. "My name is Marin Vestal. I was born in Ohio. My father was a Lutheran and a drunkard, in that order and then in the other. I have earned my own bread since I was 14. and in the spring of 1883 I was a laundress and a mender at a boarding house on Chateau Avenue in St. Louis. I could read and write. Most of the girls in that house could not. Tate did not move. Adelaide Rusk was real, Marin said. She was 19 and very pretty and afraid of ending up a laundress. She paid me 5 cents a letter to answer the matrimonial advertisements for her. I wrote 11 letters that spring for 4 different men and thought nothing of it. It was easier money than a shirt collar. She turned her cup a half turn on the table. You were the 4th. You wrote back and asked what I meant about the winters. Her voice went very low. Adelaide ran off with a drummer in October of '83 after the 3rd letter. She left a note and a hair ribbon, and she never thought about you or about me again. And you kept writing. I kept writing. She looked up at him. I had no right, and I know exactly what I did. Every week for 2 years I sat down at 10 o'clock at night after the last of the wash and wrote to a man under another woman's name and told him the truth about everything except that one thing. Her mouth twisted. Every word in those letters is mine. The winters and my mother and why I cannot stand the smell of lye and the thing about the streetcar horses. All mine. I signed them Adelaide because by the time I understood what I had done, the only way to keep you was to keep lying, and I was not strong enough to lose you. The lamp ticked. Out in the pasture a horse called, and another answered. So there it is, said Marin Vestal. You lied about a face. I lied about a person. I would say we were square, but I do not believe it works that way. Tate Renslow sat with his hands flat on the table, the good one and the crooked one, and when he spoke it was not about her at all. May of '64, he said. Virginia, a place they called the Wilderness. I was 18 years old and did not know one thing about anything. The brush caught fire between the lines the second day, and there were men in it that could not walk. She went very still. I went in and got one out. A boy from Ashtabula named Pruitt, with his leg broke. Then I went back in for the next one, and the fire came around behind us, and that is where I got this. He turned the left hand over, once, so the crooked finger showed. A limb of it caught my hand against a burning oak, and I could not get free for a while. A surgeon set the finger in a wagon 3 days after, in the dark, and set it wrong. And the second man died anyway. He died on the ground about 40 feet from where I fell. He stopped. I have never told that to a living soul. I wrote it to you in the second winter, and I burned the page. I burned it because I could not stand for her to see me, he thought, and I have been standing in front of her all summer. I know you did, Marin said. You wrote the next letter 3 weeks late and apologized for nothing, and I have wondered ever since what was in the one you did not send. Tate looked at the woman across his table, the plain, long face, the red knuckles, the perfectly steady gray eyes, and said the truest thing that was in him. I have got no use for a face, mine or anybody's. I fell in love with a hand. And Marin Vestal reached across the plank table and took his left hand in both of hers, the crooked finger and the ink worn into the knuckle and all, and held it the way a person holds something they have owned a long while and have only now been given. So did I, she said. What happened at the end of that evening took very little time and altered the whole rest of both their lives. He came around the table, and she stood up to meet him, and when he kissed her, something in her that had been braced for 26 years quietly let go, and something in him that had stood guard since Virginia sat down at last and put its head in its hands. Marin, he said, when he could. He said it like a man tasting fresh water. Say it again, she said. Act 6. The climactic threat the barn burned on the 11th of August at about 2 in the morning, and it burned from the northeast corner where the loose hay was, which is not where a barn catches by accident. Marin came awake to the horses screaming. She was out the door in her nightdress and her boots with no thought in her head at all. The whole north end was going, flame running up the inside of the wall and out under the eave, smoke rolling flat and orange along the ground in the river wind. Tate was already at the doors. 22 head were in that barn. He got the alleyway open, and the front 11 came out in a wave that would have killed her had she not gone up the corral rails. She swung the gate wide and stood on the bottom rail waving her shawl and shrieking at them in a voice she did not recognize, and turned the whole terrified mass of them out into the night pasture instead of back into the fire. Then she went for the ones that would not come. They worked the back stalls together with wet sacking over the horses' eyes and got 7 more. The 9th was the black 4-year-old, who had gone to the back of his stall and set himself there to die, the way panicked horses will. Marin went in and got him. She walked through the smoke and laid her hand flat on his neck and said, "It's only me. It's only dull old me," and he came out behind her at a walk, like a lamb. Tate went back a last time for the 2 colts in the far pen, and that is when the loft came down. It caught him across the left shoulder and drove him to the boards, and he came out of that barn on his hands and knees, dragging a colt by the halter with his shirt burning down the back. Marin put him out with a horse blanket and the water in the trough, and got him 20 feet clear before the roof went in a column of sparks that they saw, later, from 4 ranches away. He had a broken collarbone, a burn across the shoulder blade the size of a supper plate, and enough smoke in him to keep him fevered for 3 days. She did not sleep for 2 of them. She cleaned the burn with clean water and lard and cloth she boiled herself, and turned him, and got broth into him, and sat by the rope bed through the 2nd night with her hand on his good wrist, listening to him talk to men who had been dead 21 years. Toward morning the fever broke, and he opened his eyes and said, "Marin, first thing," and she put her face down on the blanket and cried for about 90 seconds, and then got up and made coffee. The neighbors came. That is one true thing about that country. Whatever a town thinks of you, it comes to a fire. 11 men she had never met stood in the black wet ruin at daylight and looked at the northeast corner, where the ground was soaked with something that was not water and had not burned right. Coal oil. The sheriff found the empty can in the willows that same morning and found Deke Rawls sleeping off whiskey in a line shack 6 miles down the river with his boots ruined and his eyebrows gone. Deke Rawls was not a brave man. He gave up who had paid him before dinner. But it was Marin who finished it. On the 1st of September, Orville Pike came out from town in a buggy with the sheriff and a paper, because a fire does not stop a note. He stood in the yard in front of the black timbers and read out that Tate Renslow owed him $511 and held up the note of hand with Tate's signature at the bottom, and offered, sorrowfully, to take the deed instead. Marin came down off the porch with the oilcloth roll under her arm. "Sheriff, I want you to look at the figure, and then I want you to look at these." She laid it out on the tailgate of the wagon in front of 11 witnesses. The 3-year-old note, where a 5 had been worked over a 2 in ink of a different age, so plain in daylight that a child could see the ghost of it. The account book in her small, clean hand, 400 borrowed, 189 paid down. And the letters, 51 of them, soft as cloth at the folds, and in the 9th one, in Tate Renslow's own crooked hand, written to a woman in St. Louis in the winter of 1883 because he told her everything, I have borrowed $400 off the postmaster at 2%, and I am not proud of it." "And this," said Marin, and set down one more sheet, a letter she had received in July, unsigned, offering her $75 to leave the county quietly, written in a hand that leaned the wrong way on purpose. "A man can disguise his letters," she said. "He cannot disguise how he crosses a T twice running, or where he lifts his pen in the word county. I have spent 2 years of my life learning to know one man by his hand." She looked at Orville Pike, and her voice never rose an inch. "It happens that I know yours. You have been writing my address on the front of my mail for 2 years. The sheriff studied the sheets a long time. Then he looked at Orville Pike, who had gone the color of tallow. Then he took him by the arm." Act 7. Resolution and epilogue. They raised the new barn in the second week of October, and the county came, 19 men and their families out the river road with wagons and dinner. The frame was up by noon and the rafters on by 4, and Emmett Doyle fell off the plate into a haystack and had to be laughed at for an hour. Reverend Feely, who had not spoken one word in Tate Renslow's defense in the Mercantile in June, carried boards all day and never mentioned it, and Tate let him, which the narrator has always thought was the more generous of the two positions. It was not an apology, exactly, out there. That was how apology was done. Orville Pike went to Deer Lodge for 4 years for arson and forgery. The note went into the county court and came out at $400 less what had been paid, and the horses covered it, and there was something left over. They were married at the river bend under the broken cottonwood on a bright cold morning in November, with the mussel shell running low and clear and the benches white above them. She wore gray. He wore his mother's curtains, made over into a good shirt collar, which was Marin's idea, and which nobody but the two of them ever knew. Reverend Feely asked for the bride's name, and Tate Renslow said, "Marin Vestal," in a voice that carried across the water, and every soul at that river learned it in the same moment. A year later, the black horse was the best-mannered animal in 3 counties and had thrown 2 foals. There was a second small bed built into the lean-to, and curtains at that window, too. The letters lived in the oilcloth roll on the shelf above the stove, beside the coffee tin, where anybody could reach them, Marin's doing. She had no patience for keeping the truth out in a barn, and on a morning in the spring of 1887, Marin Renslow came out of the lean-to before daylight and found the lamp lit, the stove going, and a sheet of paper set square in the middle of the plank table under a coffee cup, though her husband was not 40 feet away in the corral with a colt. It said, "Gone out early. There is a meadowlark on the top rail I want you to hear. Yours, T.R." The capital R wobbled. The pen had dug too deep on the downstroke, the way it does when a finger will not lie flat. There was a thumbprint of ink in the margin. She stood in her own kitchen in the dark and read it 4 times, and then did what she had done 1,100 miles away in a boarding house on Chateau Avenue with 3 other women breathing around her. She pressed the paper flat and folded it along the crease and put it away to keep. Some people fall in love with a face. It is the commonest thing in the world, and it is not a small thing, and the narrator would not speak against it. But there are others who come to it the long way, by lamplight, at 10 o'clock at night, in another person's handwriting, 1 week at a time across 2 winters and 1,100 miles. And by the time they finally stand in the same room, they have learned the whole of a soul and none of the packaging. Those are the ones who do not need to recognize a face. She thought she would know him anywhere. She almost did not. She knew his hands. If your heart has ever leaned toward a story where love arrived quiet and took the long road and stayed long enough to change everything, then this story was for you. Out on the Musselshell in Montana, where the wind still sounds like a train that never arrives, and the cottonwood at the bend is older now than anyone living, the love between Tate Renslow and Maren Vestal became the kind that does not need anybody left to remember it in order to be true. If stories of frontier love that endured through hardship, prejudice, and the kind of silence only the West knows speak to you, follow the lonesome trail for more. Here, the love stories are quiet, the courage is real, and the last word is always worth the wait. Until the next trail.